So this is the marini that we pulled. We're gonna cut it up with this saw right now. So the saw is actually just a bunch of diamonds, just like those wheels that we always use. So it doesn't actually hurt me when I touch it, unlike most blades. So I made this jig over here. It'll help me cut the same size slice out of this marini rod all the way down. So there's a bunch of clear up here. I'll remove that first, and then we'll start cutting out the actual pieces. Here we go. So, now that we've got all the marinis cut up, we can take them into the hot shop where we will lay them out on top of a kiln shelf. Once it's on the kiln shelf, we can heat it up and then actually squeeze all the marini together so that they touch and tack fuse. After tack fusing, we can roll it up, where we'll take a blowpipe and some glass on the end of that and make this nice little cylinder. The end will be open, but that's okay because we'll close it off, and then from there we'll be able to add more glass and then shape the piece into its final form. Once we get the final form, we will use the powderized black glass to create all that beautiful texture on top of the hanao pieces. Then it'll have to go into a kiln over a few days to prevent cracking. It'll come down slowly in temperature. Once that's done, we'll take it into the cold shop and you'll see the next part where we grind away all that texture to see the patterned marinis underneath again. So when we get to the shop, we'll turn on the kilns and the reheating chamber, but they take a little while to get hot. And so in the meantime, I'm cleaning my tools, and these are the squishers, my marini squishers, which I will use later on in the process. And for this specific piece, it needs to be certain dimensions to fit in a niche, as this is for special commission. I use these large calipers to make sure that I'm able to get the piece really close, if not perfectly as measured. I usually draw it out in a little outline on the ground so that we can get the curve right and place the actual piece against the outline. This is the marini on a plate that we had already set up, but it was heating up in the kiln. So it goes from the kiln straight into the reheating chamber. The kiln preheated it because if we went straight from room temperature into this reheating chamber, it's over 2,000 degrees at this point, and the glass would just crack and actually just blow up. So to prevent that, we preheat it. And we also go slowly into the reheating chamber, just to make sure that they'll stay good. I'll equalize the heat by torching the back, because that's usually the coldest. And then I use the marini squishers to push them together and squish each piece so that they are touching each other. It'll be really important later on when we go for the roll up. There's a small little clear cane that I add to the end, which will help me to save some of the pattern and color of the actual marini. This is the collar, which is a glass on the end of the blowpipe, which I am going to use right here to actually stick onto that clear cane and roll up the marini on the outside of that. So you can see on each side end that it's kind of staggered, and they are staggered in opposites to each other. And so I'll connect them like a zipper. I heat up certain parts using the torch to make it easier to connect it. So here's the front getting touched together, and you can see that zipper happening right there, how they interlock. This way, when the piece is finished, you'll never actually be able to tell where the seam was. I'll torch the back just a little bit, because again, that is the oldest part, and then touch them together. Finally, we can start marvering it out on that steel table and rolling it around. That'll condense the pattern to eliminate all those gaps and spaces between each marini that are still there. Because if there's gaps and holes, then we can't actually blow and make a new shape. So we'll get it really hot and roll it on the marver continuously, and as you can see, it's starting to shrink up. Now we still have a big open hole at the end, even though there's no small holes between the marini. And so we'll put what we call a cookie of clear glass on the marver, and I will stick it on the end of the marini roll-up. This seals the roll-up completely. I'll go ahead and make a constriction right by the clear until I'm able to cut it off, and now all that we're left is the beautiful lava marini pattern. So the kiln shelf had some release on it that got stuck in the marini a little bit. So just pulling it out as kind of a quality control and cutting it off. Can you actually blow ground? Yeah, just a little bit. Finally, we're ready to add more glass to make the shape. I use a wooden block made of hardwood with low sap content, so it doesn't burn up very easily. And then the paper, as usual, is just some newsprint that is soaked in water and folded up a special way. The wet newspaper touching the really hot glass evaporates the water on the surface, creating like a little barrier of steam, which is between the glass and the paper while we work it. This is the closest we can get to actually working and touching the glass with our hands. So here I'm going into the furnace where all the molten glass lives. It is hot 24/7, and I'm spooling it up just like hot honey. When I come out, you can see just how hot that glass is. So again, I'll use a wooden block to kind of shape it up, make it easier to handle. I'll use the newspaper again to point it up a little bit, because the block makes it nice and round, but you want kind of a pointier shape before we go for this gather. The amount of times that we gather is dependent on how large we need the piece to be. This piece is pretty large, so we'll need at least 2 gathers on top of our original start marini. While I go into this block, you can see the difference in the pattern and the clear. The clear is glowing really hard, and then the pattern is that duller color in the center.
Wow.
We finally got enough glass, so I'll marver it out on the steel table and point it up. So I keep checking it with the calipers just to make sure that we're within size.
Yeah, we might need to like keep that width. Yeah.
While I roll it around on the steel table, it cools wherever it touches, and so in this case it's the front because I'm pointing it up. And so I'll blow into it to blow up the back because that's still hot, but since it cooled the front won't move as much.
Just turn for me, please. Drop it out kind of far. That can be skinny.
Now we gotta go for the neckline. I'll heat my tool called the jacks, and it'll just help it glide better. Grant will get the back really hot, and then I'll start squeezing down on the bubble. We're also angling the whole piece down, and so as we're squeezing and working it, it is also lengthening because of gravity. If you look closely, you can see that constriction line getting tighter and tighter. The smaller it gets, the harder it is to keep in control, and Grant's doing a really good job keeping it all centered up as it gets harder and harder to work with. Since the back is still really hot, I have Grant blow so that we can expand the back, because it's not going to be able to get that hot and expand later on. We make the constriction line even smaller so that it'll break off nice and easy later on. Then I use this torch to kind of put the heat where I want. You can see us stretching it out because that's where I torched and it was the hottest. We'll continue to stretch and shape and inflate the piece until it's the right length, or at least close to it. Once we get close enough, we'll be able to flatten it and then pull it out to get the final length. So here we go with some cork blocks. These are one of my favorite tools because my friend had made them custom just for me. I'm just flattening the piece by pushing these cork blocks together and squeezing the piece in the middle. And Grant will actually cap the back end so that when I push both sides together, the trapped air inside causes the edges of the piece to expand because they're still hot, while the flats where I'm touching is now cooling rapidly. We're gonna go for the final pull, but I need a little bit of a handle to pull from. And so I use these diamond shears to kind of create a little ball, which I'll be able to pull later on after getting it hot.
Off. Alright, that'll do it, I think.
So I'll use this compressed air to cool that part down, and then we'll go for the final heat, and this is it. This is the final move right here. Happens really quick, and this is really smooth because the heat was nice and even. I'm pulling that little handle that I made to give it the perfect curve and taper. Use a finer torch to heat up the end and then cut it off. Now this is pretty much the final shape, and this is how it's gonna look. But we still need to add all of that textured goodness on the outside. So we'll heat it up and take it over to the powder booth. This is where I have all the finely crushed up powderized black glass in the sifter, and I'll keep tapping it to allow just the right amount of powder to fall onto the piece. Each subsequent time, it'll build up more and more texture. One of the challenging parts is really just seeing the whole piece and what parts are covered and what are not. So this is the final coat, and it really takes two people for a piece this large to be able to see and make sure that we have full coverage. The final piece of this, after the texture is completed, is to torch the outside, which will bring the metal oxides that make up the black glass to the surface, which is why all my pieces look very shiny and metallic. We'll put some water right on the constriction mark that we made very early on. And I'll take this little baseball bat and hit it.
Thank you, Deshaun.
It'll break off, and then we'll torch that end so that it's not sharp later on when we pick it up. What happened? Show us the finished piece. It's not done yet. It's got to cool over a few days, and then the next part is actually taking it into the cold shop, where I will use diamond encrusted wheels to grind through that surface texture that we created in certain spots, creating lava flows and revealing the marini patterns underneath. So if you want to see that video, make sure to subscribe so that you get notified when that one drops.